Welcome back to Hazel's Flight School, Beer Edition. I'm Lily Margolis.
And I'm Josh Gosnell.
And today we're talking about the darker styles of German beer.
All right, and to start off, we are going to be looking at the Tucher Rotbier. Tucher being one of the oldest breweries in Nuremberg in Bavaria, one of the oldest wheat producers in that region of Germany as well. Now, Rotbier, meaning red in German, not rotten, not putrid, nothing of the sort, just the color red, coming from the color of the malt that they use, rather than using a pale malt for something like a Hefeweizen for a Kolsch, and rather than a darker malt, such as for a Dunkel or a Schwarzbier, this kind of fits somewhere right in the middle. So it's not very pale, not very dark, somewhere in that amber reddish hue.
When we're talking about the color of a malt, does that color come from the plant itself, or is that more a product of the way the plant is processed, or like the temperature used?
Perfect. Definitely more so on the malting side with the grains, that they do it for a different temperature or a different period of time. So just like when you make toast, if you throw it in the toaster, turn it on, pop it out, it's not going to have much color to it. You leave it in and you go and take a bath, you're going to come back to a very dark black piece of toast, burnt to a crisp. And we'll see a little bit of that reflected through a couple of these beers, where we'll get the nice toasty malt to it, but then also get some of those darker, richer, deeper, blacker color and flavors to them. So this won't be as intense, but we can start to see some of the evolutions of the longer kilning process, the little more caramelization, that Maillard reaction, really changing some of the flavor notes of the wheat and barley that they're using. So with Tucher in particular, they use an oak maturation process. So they use oak tanks to ferment these and to store the beer itself. Now, with having the wood and the oak that they've been using, you don't pick up on a ton of woody character. At least in my experience with Tucher, you just get more of this roundness, this fullness of flavor, rather than a really oaky character like you may get, say, out of a whiskey or certain wines, or in a fresh oak barrel. These being used time and time again, they've lost a little bit of that wood character, but keep that good, just general roundness to it.
Do you think that with beer in general, having the beer in an oak barrel, is it able to pick up on the characteristics of wood in the same way that a wine can, or is it generally not as prominent in beer?
It's different in its own aspect, for sure. You get wood-aged beer, you do get this woody character in a different sort of way you would get from a spirit or from a wine. Being that it has more alcohol to it, it has a different effect on the wood than beer would. Also, beer being carbonated also gives the barrel a little bit of breathe to it, to where you'll have a little bit different flavor profiles. And since they are a lighter in alcohol, the alcohol doesn't always necessarily mask or extract a ton of those flavors out. It does it just very, very lightly, especially in this beer in particular. But let's give it a try. And to me, I can already smell that little bit of a wheat character to it, which to me comes off in the aroma of just a very light banana.
Yeah, you definitely get the banana, you definitely get the wheat, and this is a characteristic I've just noticed from tasting with you over time, is a lot of these German beers do have that banana characteristic, that wheat characteristic. I'm curious to see if that shows up as we move through this lineup.
There'll definitely be a couple more mentions of banana or of that wheat profile in some of these beers, for sure.
Do you think that smelling banana in your beer, like if you were blind tasting, can that be a good determinant of, hey, this is a German beer? Hefeweizen, for example.
It could be, yeah. banana being definitely a keynote you get in some of these wheat beers with that German yeast character as well. It can really bring that up to the forefront. And as we'll see with a couple of these, you still get that across varying styles as well. You'll get a little different banana note or a little different of that wheat character coming through across the spectrum, for sure. And then it just still maintains that beautiful, crisp lager character to where you get just a clean hit of flavor, and it's really, really easy drinking.
Yeah, this is definitely a great summer sipper.
All right, and next we are going to go to Kostritzer, which is a very hard to read, hard to pronounce name, but we are going to be looking at their Schwarzbier. So Schwarz, don't think Spaceballs. Schwarz meaning black or dark, and you can see that very well, not reflected, but shown in the beer itself with its dark coloration. So with this, we'll be starting to lean into a couple to where dark or black may mean something just a little bit different depending on the beer and the style itself.
Okay.
Where we'll see the Schwarz here, we'll see the Dunkel later. Dunkel also meaning kind of like dark.
So what's the difference between a dark beer and a black beer?
So I would say the black beer being the Schwarzbier, going to be using some unhusked or dehusked malts, because within these styles, they don't want a ton of that malty bitterness to come through. It's just a process where removing that will remove some of the tannins, some of those bitter compounds you can find in other beers. Whereas a Dunkel, they don't necessarily need to do that, or they give a bit of layering to it as well, using different styles of malts rather than one mostly for color. The Dunkel will be on the darker side, but it'll have a little bit more layer of flavors. So Kostritzer, being produced in Bad Kostritz, where it gets its name, where a lot of these breweries will, kind of in central Germany. And this one has a little interesting story. Post-World War II, East and West Germany split. They were kind of like right on the cusp. And going into 1989, one of the brewers, head brewers, owners of the Kostritzer, what's now known as the Kostritzer Brewery, essentially said that at that point they were only making about 10 barrels of this Schwarzbier a year. And in their words, they said it's as if saying there were only 10 black rhinos left in the world. Saying basically the style was nearly put into extinction because of the split of East and West Germany. Under reunification, there were a bunch of different brewery acquisitions, and as well in Kostritzer, eventually to today's day and age, one of the most popular, most sold black lagers out of Germany, inside Germany as well as outside of Germany. So it definitely has a bit of history to it. But you'll see why it gets the name Black Lager, with much more of that roastier character. Like I said, a darker toast, so you get some almost burnt notes, a little more on that deeper, darker side of flavors.
Yeah, definitely deeper and darker. It was interesting texturally as well. I felt like there was more carbonation from the first beer we tried, and that could just be me, but that's what really stood out to me. Like, that was the first thing I noticed on the palate was texture, and then you really just we progressed.
Yeah, and as we go down the line here too, you'll see some of that heavier character come into play. This has all of that darker, roastier character, that chocolate, a little bit of coffee, like clove, a little bit of licorice there, I feel. But it's still very much a lager, so it has this crisp, clean, just drinkability to it. To where if you like all those dark flavors, but don't necessarily want a porter, a stout, a Dunkel, some of those heavier, darker styles, The Schwarzbier is a great middle ground. It still has that drinkability, but all of those darker flavors attached with the darker malt that they use.
Yeah, this definitely tastes like baking chocolate to me.
Yeah.
Like the kind you usually wouldn't eat by itself. But yeah, definitely very drinkable. Another good summer sipper.
Yeah. Next, we're going to move on to the Kloster Andechs Weissbier Dunkel. So, as we've gone over in the past, that Weiss meaning white or wheat, but then also Dunkel meaning dark. So it's a dark wheat beer.
Yeah.
Now, the Andechs Monastery, definitely famous for some of its religious pilgrimages. With this being at the base of Mount Andechs, they're essentially a holy mountain for these Benedictine monks. This one in particular introduces a couple of different brewing techniques that are kind of specific to Germany, but can be applied and are applied across other styles around the world as well. The first is decoction mashing. So essentially what it is, you have your big boiling kettle, or your big mash tun. You have your big mash tun, and they take some from that, they have it at a certain temperature, they'll siphon some of it off, bring that up to a boil, which in turn caramelizes some of the malts. It evaporates a little bit of that water out, changes this little piece just enough. When they re-add it in there, it adds a depth of character to it, but then brings the temperature up just ever so slightly. And so that way it goes through these different mashing steps to achieve different things. To get rid of or to enhance certain flavors or certain compounds within the beer. That way produce a cleaner, or in this case, a little more fuller bodied beer.
And that process of separating out part of the mash and then re-adding, is that very common? Do we see that in a lot of different beers?
Mostly with a lot of these very typical traditional styles. Most of the time, or an easier way, let's put it, would just be to keep everything in the mash tun and you just turn the heat up a little bit. You bring it up to that next step. You bring it up to that next temperature threshold that you need. This is definitely a much more labor-intensive process, but it shows in the final product for sure. And with this again, what's that note on the nose?
Banana.
More banana. So yeah, definitely being that dark wheat, here we are with that just beautiful banana flavor, that banana aroma, excuse me.
This one reminds me more of like Bananas Foster, like some kind of like fun caramelized banana dessert with like a little bit of sugar and maybe some flames.
Or even to me, just with that little bit of that little chocolate, that little nuttiness. Go get some Ben & Jerry's Chunky Monkey.
Ooh.
And right alongside this,
That sounds really good.
It is pretty darn close. And then yeah, what do you feel in comparison to the other dark or black beer that we've had?
This was much more bitter. You really get more like aggressive dark characteristics. Like for me, this really tasted like bitter like baking chocolate, and this is definitely softer on the palate. You're getting that classic like wheat beer banana, but I also would never have guessed this is a wheat beer because I associate that with a paler color usually.
Yeah, I mean the Weissbier Dunkel, especially here, you can use wheat across the spectrum as well. It's not just exclusively for your pale Blue Moons or your Belgian Wits or your American wheat. It can be used across the board to really give that sort of flavor to any number, any color, any heftiness of beers, as we'll keep seeing as we go on.
Thanks for joining us today. We're going to take a quick layover. Join us again next week for part 2 of our exploration of darker styles of German beer.